Welcome to the deep dive. Um, Today we are exploring a genuinely fascinating article from Technology Review.
It really is a great piece.
Yeah, it's titled A Blueprint for Using AI to Strengthen Democracy. And, our mission today is to basically completely flip the script on that doom and gloom narrative that, well, we are constantly inundated with right now.
Right, the whole Terminator narrative.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. Always hearing about how advanced algorithms are going to take all our jobs or, I don't know, generate endless deepfakes. But today we're unpacking a comprehensive framework that looks at how artificial intelligence could actually be the ultimate tool to upgrade and fortify our civic institutions.
Which is such a refreshing angle, honestly.
It really is. So now that we have our source and our mission laid out, I want to ask you, the listener, to do something for just a second. I want you to just pause and imagine a scenario.
Okay.
Imagine a world where artificial intelligence isn't some looming threat, but what if, instead, it was the very engine that made the government work perfectly for you?
I mean, it's a radical inversion of our current cultural anxiety, right?
Okay.
We are currently sitting at one of the, well, arguably the most critical frontier of human society right now,
Right.
which is this intersection of advanced computational models and, governance. Because when we consider democracy, our mental image is usually pretty static.
Yeah, like neoclassical architecture, right.
Exactly. Centuries-old parchment, incredibly slow, deliberate procedural rules. We don't typically associate the foundation of our republic with cutting-edge, rapidly evolving neural networks.
No, definitely not.
But the blueprint we are examining today argues that these two concepts are not just compatible, but that democracy inherently requires this technological leap. It needs it to remain viable in this incredibly complex modern era.
Yeah, and the article actually anchors this argument by looking backward, to help us look
Oh,
forward.
the historical parallel.
Exactly. It focuses on how innovations in information dissemination have historically reshaped governance structures and, well, triggered massive societal transformations like the printing press and broadcast media.
Yeah.
And if we view governance through a technological lens, these historical leaps were essentially massive societal OS updates.
Oh, I like that. OS update.
Right, like the printing press was democracy 1.0. Suddenly the written word was and then broadcast media, radio, and television, that rolls out as democracy 2.0. That allowed the state to project information directly into your living room in real time.
Yeah, the broadcast era.
But, and here's my question for you, if those legacy systems were fundamentally about broadcasting information out to the masses, how does an algorithmic model, how does AI act as the next frontier? Are we just looking at a much faster printing press, or is it something entirely different?
No, we are looking at a completely different architecture here.
Okay.
Because the printing press and the radio, they changed the marginal cost of distribution, right? They democratized awareness. They shifted global power dynamics simply by altering who had access to the information.
Right. Who gets to see the data?
Exactly. But those technologies were strictly one-directional. Information was pushed from a central node out to the edges of the network. The listener or reader just absorbs it.
They just consume it.
Right. But artificial intelligence represents this unprecedented structural shift because it alters the marginal cost of synthesis.
Oh, synthesis.
Yeah, it doesn't merely distribute static text. It ingests it, it contextualizes it, and it dynamically interacts with the data.
Okay, wait. So moving from a model of mass distribution to mass synthesis, that actually changes the utility of the information itself.
Exactly.
Because, like, a printing press can give you a physical copy of a newly drafted, thousands-page legislative bill.
And good luck with that.
Right. So it solves the access problem, sure, but it absolutely doesn't solve the comprehension problem. You still have to sit down and read the 1,000 pages of legalese.
Which nobody does.
Exactly. But an advanced language model, it can ingest that same bill, cross-reference its clauses with, like, a century of existing municipal code.
Yeah.
And immediately output a probabilistic analysis of how the new zoning regulations will impact the specific property taxes in your particular zip code.
And that shift right there,
Yeah.
from static text to dynamic synthesis, That is the core mechanism of this blueprint.
It's massive.
It is. It moves us away from an era where citizens are merely passive recipients of civic data. When a system can process and synthesize at that scale, it fundamentally alters the relationship between the government's data architecture and you, the everyday citizen. The blueprint argues that AI can be deployed to analyze these vast, historically opaque data lakes, providing the public with highly contextualized insights into government operations. And the underlying theory is that this level of cognitive legibility, it enables informed public participation.
It makes people actually want to get involved.
Exactly, and ultimately fosters a much deeper trust in democratic institutions.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here. I want to push back on this premise that simply deploying AI to analyze vast amounts of data automatically generates trust.
Fair enough.
Because let's be real about municipal data. Open government initiatives over the last decade have resulted in thousands of raw data sets just being dumped onto public portals.
Oh, it's a mess.
It's totally unstructured, it's filled with dense bureaucratic formatting, and frankly, it is largely hostile to the average user.
Absolutely.
So if a city government uses an AI to analyze 10,000 spreadsheets and then, I don't know, publishes an interactive dashboard of that analysis, the average citizen is still facing a massive asymmetric information gap.
More data doesn't mean more clarity.
Right. Providing more analysis of a fundamentally broken data structure doesn't automatically rebuild trust. For you as a citizen, it often just overwhelms you. It feels like, well, what if the AI is just a superpowered universal translator, but the output is still exhausting?
Well, that is a highly valid critique of those early open data initiatives.
Yeah.
Because transparency without legibility is just noise.
That's noise, yeah.
But the blueprint isn't suggesting we use AI to generate more dashboards.
Okay, what is it suggesting, though?
It proposes using AI as a structural interface layer. I want you to think of it less as an analytical tool and more as like an API for the government.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because legacy civic data is written in the machine code of bureaucracy, right?
Yeah.
Legalese, obscure tax codes, fragmented zoning ordinances.
The stuff that puts you to sleep.
Exactly. The average citizen does not have the compiler necessary to turn that bureaucratic machine code into an executable understanding of their own civic environment.
Ah, so the AI acts as the compiler.
Yeah.
Like, instead of you, the citizen, trying to manually parse a 500-page environmental impact report to figure out why a new transit line is being routed right through your neighborhood.
Which you'd never have time to do.
Right. The AI layer interfaces directly with that unstructured PDF, and it acts as that universal translator, turning the bureaucratic machine code into a localized, clear, highly specific output for you.
Exactly. The transparency engine proposed here focuses on comprehension, not just visibility, because mistrust in institutions frequently stems from this perception that decisions are just rendered in a black box.
Oh, 100%.
A municipal budget is passed, and the resulting downstream effects on public services seem entirely disconnected from the initial vote.
Yeah, you don't see the connection.
Right, you lack the connective tissue to understand the causality. But by deploying an AI interface that can instantly synthesize the causal chain between, say, a macro-level budget allocation and a micro-level pothole repair on your street.
Right, you suddenly see the link.
Exactly, the opacity is removed. You cannot actively participate in a civic debate if the terms of the debate are obscured by bureaucratic formatting. But once the data becomes functionally legible, trust can begin to rebuild organically.
Because it makes sense.
Right. It isn't reliant on you agreeing with the policy. It relies on the process finally being coherent.
Wow. But, okay, so that structural shift toward legibility, that only really solves half the equation.
How so?
Well, a functioning democracy requires citizens to understand the state, sure, but it also requires the machinery of the state to effectively execute on behalf of the citizens.
Right.
And the blueprint asserts that AI systems can help streamline bureaucratic processes, making government significantly more efficient and responsive. But I think we need to dissect how AI actually interfaces with the slow, often fragmented machinery of bureaucracy.
Yeah, because bureaucracy is the primary friction point where citizens actually experience the state, right?
Oh, yeah. Think about the last time you had to go to the DMV or wait at a government office.
Exactly. It is where the abstract concept of government becomes a tangible, usually very frustrating reality.
So frustrating.
And that friction usually originates from deeply siloed legacy IT systems. Like, A single citizen requesting a small business permit might trigger a workflow that requires manual verification across the Department of Revenue, the zoning board, and the local health inspector.
And none of those departments talk to each other.
No, they often operate on completely different database architectures, requiring human clerks to literally manually re-enter data from one system to another.
Which is insane. The cognitive burden, the time tax placed on you, the citizen, to navigate those disjointed systems is immense. You are basically forced to act as the courier between isolated government databases, filling out redundant paperwork, and just waiting months for asynchronous approvals.
Yeah.
So if we apply the AI framework here, the algorithm acts as like an ultra-efficient traffic controller, the ultimate integration layer. It can extract unstructured data from a submitted application, instantly verify it against those disparate departmental databases, flag any anomalies for human review, and essentially clear the routine bureaucratic backlog in milliseconds.
And the technical capability to clear that backlog is actually well within current algorithmic reach.
Really? Already?
Yeah, absolutely. But we must evaluate why this matters from a civic perspective.
Yeah.
Because we are conditioned to view efficiency as a purely economic metric, right?
Yeah, reducing overhead, cutting labor costs, maximizing throughput.
Exactly. But in the context of governance, efficiency takes on a really profound philosophical weight. It becomes the primary metric of democratic responsiveness.
Okay, wait. This is a critical pivot in the blueprint, and I want to push on this a bit.
Sure.
How does cutting red tape, how does reducing the processing time of a permit fundamentally equate to a stronger democracy? I mean, a highly efficient autocracy is still an autocracy, right? Why is administrative throughput a pillar of democratic strength?
Because delay in public service is a form of denial.
Oh, wow. Delay is denial.
Yes. A democratic government is fundamentally a representative service provider. If a citizen is entitled to a civic service, unemployment benefits, a building permit, veterans' health care, and the state requires 6 months of labyrinthine navigation to deliver that service, the state is failing to represent that citizen effectively.
That makes total sense.
The machinery's inability to execute nullifies the democratic mandate that created the service in the first place.
So it frames the bureaucratic backlog not just as an annoyance like waiting in line, but as an actual structural failure of the democratic contract.
Exactly. In a modern society where commercial and social interactions occur near instantaneously, a government that operates on a timeline of months breeds deep civic cynicism.
Well, people just give up.
The friction alienates the citizen. But by utilizing algorithmic processing to eliminate that administrative bottleneck, you are demonstrating to the public that democratic institutions are still capable of scaling to meet the demands of contemporary life. You are validating the efficacy of the democratic model itself.
Okay, so we have established this amazing framework where AI acts as a mass synthesizer of civic data, a compiler that makes the government legible to you, and an integration layer that dramatically accelerates the state's responsiveness to your actual needs.
It's powerful.
It is an incredibly potent vision for institutional revitalization. However, and this is a big however, the blueprint explicitly warns against adopting this model without acknowledging the severe structural risks.
Yes, the ethical tightrope.
Right. Integrating AI at this scale introduces massive ethical considerations. The text emphasizes the necessity of ensuring these systems uphold democratic values like fairness and equality. It calls for robust frameworks to guarantee the technology serves as a tool for empowerment rather than a mechanism for control.
Which is the most crucial part of this entire blueprint.
So here is where it gets really tricky. If an AI is analyzing all this data and streamlining all these decisions, who is checking the AI's math? How do we ensure this ultimate tool of efficiency doesn't quietly turn into a tool of surveillance or control?
That transition from theoretical capability to practical deployment is where the blueprint demands rigorous scrutiny. We are discussing handing over a significant portion of the state's administrative execution to algorithmic models. And the assertion that technology is neutral is a dangerous fallacy in this context.
Yeah, technology always has a bias.
Always. An algorithm optimizing for maximum efficiency will inevitably find the path of least resistance. And without deliberate constraints, that path will frequently trample over nuanced civic equities.
Right, because the core vulnerability lies in the training data and the optimization metrics. Like, if an AI is tasked with streamlining the allocation of municipal grants, and its primary objective function is purely administrative efficiency, how do we ensure it doesn't quietly automate historic biases?
It's a huge risk.
If a neural network is trained on 50 years of housing data that contains inherent discriminatory practices, the AI won't just replicate those biases, right? It will execute them with unprecedented scale and invisible precision. The red tape just becomes highly efficient algorithmic discrimination. So we really have to examine how these robust frameworks practically function to check the AI's math.
Well, the oversight mechanisms cannot be an afterthought. They must be foundational to the architecture. A robust framework in this context requires moving away from proprietary black box models operated by private vendors.
No corporate secrets running the government.
Exactly. If an algorithm is determining the allocation of public resources or the approval of civic permits, the weights and parameters of that model must be subject to public audit.
Okay, how does that work practically?
This involves continuous adversarial testing. So, researchers intentionally perturbing input variables to measure if the system yields differential treatment across various demographic markers.
Oh, I see. So the audit process is essentially a stress test for algorithmic equality.
Yes, exactly.
You feed the system thousands of simulated applications, slightly altering variables like, say, zip codes or income brackets, just to ensure the output remains statistically fair.
That's the idea.
But even with open source models and rigorous red teaming like that, you are still centralizing an immense amount of operational power within the algorithmic layer. The blueprint positions this as a tool for empowerment, but an interface that knows exactly how to perfectly optimize your civic interactions is also an interface uniquely positioned to surveil and, well, subtly manipulate those interactions.
And that tension right there between empowerment and control is the defining systemic risk of this blueprint. The frameworks must enforce a strict decoupling of administrative execution from surveillance capabilities.
They have to be separated.
Completely. The data architecture must employ cryptographic techniques, like differential privacy, ensuring the system can learn from aggregate civic trends without ever having access to the unencrypted, granular data of an individual citizen.
Okay, that makes sense.
The goal of the framework is to bind the AI to the democratic process, ensuring it remains an instrument for you, the citizen, to hold the machinery accountable, rather than an instrument for the machinery to silently manage you. But the complexity of engineering those technical guardrails is staggering.
Yeah, we are essentially tasked with writing the Constitution for an algorithmic state.
That's a great way to put it.
We have to encode the abstract philosophical concepts of due process, equal protection, and civic liberty into mathematical weights and vector databases. The margin for error is incredibly narrow.
The stakes are absolute. I mean, a successful implementation preserves the democratic experiment, right? It upgrades its capacity to function in a high-velocity world. But a flawed implementation, one that prioritizes frictionless control over transparent empowerment, risks permanently severing the already fragile bond of civic trust.
It's a lot to weigh. So let's synthesize the territory we've covered today. We began by discarding the standard dystopian narrative, examining a blueprint that treats AI as the critical upgrade required for our institutions to survive.
Democracy 3.0.
Exactly. We mapped the historical evolution from the printing press's mass distribution to the algorithm's mass synthesis. We analyzed how an AI compiler could translate opaque bureaucratic machine code into legible, contextualized data for you, dissolving the black box of government operations.
Removing the opacity.
Right. And we explored the philosophical imperative of bureaucratic efficiency, recognizing that systemic delay is a denial of democratic rights, and that AI can serve as the ultimate red tape cutter to restore responsiveness.
Yeah.
Finally, we navigated the deep systemic risks, acknowledging that without rigorous cryptographic and open source frameworks, the drive for efficiency could easily mask automated bias and centralized control.
The blueprint forces a really necessary evolution in our civic imagination. The integration of algorithmic processing into the state apparatus is not a distant hypothetical anymore.
Right, it's happening.
Right, the localized pilot programs and the initial architectural shifts are occurring now. The critical variable is whether this integration will be a passive drift guided by vendor convenience or a deliberate, structured effort to encode democratic principles into the technology itself.
Wow. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final concept to analyze, a thought that pushes the premise of ultimate bureaucratic efficiency to its absolute limit.
Yeah, consider the endpoint of this technological trajectory. Imagine we successfully implement the blueprint. We engineer an algorithmic governance layer that is perfectly transparent, flawlessly equitable, and hyper-responsive.
The dream scenario.
Right. The system perfectly anticipates your civic needs, renewing your licenses, allocating your tax benefits, scheduling your public services with zero friction and absolute precision. The machinery of the state runs perfectly on autopilot.
Sounds amazing.
It does, but at what point does that maximum efficiency degrade the fundamental nature of democracy? If the government requires zero input, zero struggle, and zero friction to operate flawlessly, does it empower you, the citizen, or does it render active, messy, human civic engagement entirely obsolete?
That is wild. A perfectly optimized system that might inadvertently engineer the citizen out of the equation entirely. It is a profound paradox to consider as we watch these systems come online. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of the systems around you, and we will catch you next time.